chapter 27, verse 1. Got some crud this morning, sorry. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth, right? So we know this one from the New Testament, but one thing that just recognized says, don't boast about tomorrow. If you go down to verse 2, it says, let another man praise you. It's really talking about, praising about tomorrow. It's about yourself, right? It's about boasting about what you have, what you know, how you're set up, how everything's going to be great because of what you've done. That's really what he's trying to talk against. And you remember the section in Luke chapter 12 where it ends up saying, this night your soul will be required of you, right? I think it's the same kind of lesson about boasting about tomorrow, that you got it all together and not leaving it to God. I do want you to turn to James chapter 4, just to show the New Testament connection here. James chapter 4, verse 13. James chapter 4, verse 13. Mine says, come now, you who say today or tomorrow I will go to such and such a city. Excuse me. Let's try that again. Verse 13. Now, nope, it's coming again. Hold on. All right, keep going. Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. Right? So again, boasting about tomorrow. I'm going to sneeze again here in a minute. Just don't know exactly when it's going to come. And then interestingly, and you don't need to turn if you want, but in Matthew chapter 6, it's really the more, well, you don't have to turn all. It's Matthew chapter 6, verse 34. And it essentially says there, take no thought of tomorrow, right? Don't waste your time worrying about tomorrow or thinking about tomorrow or boasting about tomorrow because God's in charge. And us focusing on how wonderful things will be tomorrow and how great it'll be then, we waste a lot of todays thinking about tomorrow. There's a lot of todays that just go by thinking, well, eventually things are going to get better, or then we got that great thing coming up later, and we're missing today. So I think that is part of what's being said here. All right. Verse 2, let another man praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger, and not your own lips, right? Another man, a stranger, someone who has nothing to gain from the praise. I do want you to turn to 2 Corinthians a minute, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, because this is the crux of it. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 18. Second Corinthians 10:18, mine says this, says, for not he who commends himself is approved, but whom the Lord commends. Right. So first of all, it says, don't be commending yourself, right? Don't be raising your own praise. And then in back of Proverbs, verse 2, it says, let another man praise you, let somebody else praise you. And most importantly, in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, let the Lord praise you, right? Let the Lord commend you. His opinion is the only one that really counts and is really important. Certainly not your own. Your own commendation of yourself is not very valuable. Verse 3. A stone is heavy and sand is weighty, but a fool's wrath is heavier than both of them. Fool is angry. When a fool is angry, it's hard to respond to that. It's hard to know how to respond because it's being said in foolishness, right? And this is a weighty thing in order to deal with that. It's tough to deal with. It's a tough challenge to respond to. If someone has an argument that you can clearly respond to, that's one thing. But if it's just a fool just railing away, this is tougher. And I think this is what this says. But it's interesting to look at verse 4 then. It says, wrath is cruel, anger is a torrent, but he who is able to stand before jealousy, but who is able to stand before jealousy? So it's interesting in verse 3, right? The fool's wrath is heavy, like a stone, like sand. But then in verse 4, it says, well, wrath is cruel and anger is torrent. So yeah, those are tough. It's tough when you have a fool who's angry with you, who's cruel to you. But who's able to stand against jealousy? Jealousy is even tougher because jealousy you don't see. Jealousy is hidden. Jealousy sneaks out through the cracks, right? That's the thing that's very difficult to deal with. When someone is jealous because of what you've done, because of your accomplishments, because of how you respond in a situation, there's often they get quiet, right? It's not the anger. The anger you can respond to, right? The nasty word you hear, you've figured out how to respond. But jealousy and quiet anger, that's the toughest stuff. That's the stuff that's tough. Anyway, that's all he's saying here. And then you see verse 5 is right along with that, right? Open rebuke is better than love carefully concealed, right? You can deal with open rebuke. And in fact, in this particular situation, it's saying that open rebuke is really showing real love, right? If you get real rebuke, if you get a real response that tells you what you're doing wrong, that's way better than someone who says that they love you but conceals it and doesn't give you a good response, doesn't tell you when you've messed up, right? Open rebuke is better than love, in quotes, that's carefully concealed. I would just say that love carefully concealed isn't love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful, right? Again, it's the same thing. Faithful, the wounds from a friend, that's a good thing. When you get told by a friend that you got a problem and that hurts, that's a good thing because you're learning, right? But the kisses of an enemy, oh, how wonderful you are, oh, how incredible you are, that is not very useful. I actually want you to turn back to Leviticus. There's an interesting passage there along this line that Leviticus chapter 19. Leviticus 19. I want to start at verse 18. Verse 18, Leviticus 19:18. It says, "You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." What's interesting is this is the verse that's quoted by Jesus in the New Testament, right? When asked, what is the greatest thing, right? It's love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. He's quoting right here from Leviticus. But I want you to back up to verse 17. Verse 17 says, "You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him." So verse 18 says, love your neighbor as yourself. Verse 17 says, rebuke your neighbor. The two go together is the point, right? If you love your neighbor, you will rebuke your neighbor. You will tell him when he's stumbling. You will tell him when he's falling into sin. That is what it's really trying to say. All right, back to Proverbs. And wherever we were. Yeah, faithful are the wounds of a friend, kisses of the enemy are deceitful. Verse 7. A satisfied soul loathes the honeycomb, but to a hungry soul, every bitter thing is sweet. I'm going to connect this to verse 8 in a minute, but just verse 7 by itself, right? It's saying here, and it's a little bit hard to interpret. So what it's saying is that a person who is satisfied, is full of something, is not interested in the best thing. Okay, a satisfied soul loathes the honeycomb, which is the best thing. And if your soul is satisfied, then you don't look. Then you hate the honeycomb, or even I think that one of the translations says that you crush the honeycomb beneath your feet because you're satisfied. And the intention there is that you're satisfied with the wrong stuff, right? You're satisfied with something that's not the best, that's not the honeycomb, and therefore you're ignoring it. And then the opposite of that in the rest of the verse, right? But to a hungry soul, someone who has nothing, every bitter thing is sweet. Everything is wonderful, right? I'm going to go and grab for it because I'm hungry. So this is showing you the two extremes, right? The extreme of I'm hungry for all things, and then I'm going to grab onto anything, and then I've gotten satisfied with the wrong things, and then I miss the best thing. So let me connect this now to verse 8 and see what they're really trying to get across. Verse 8 says, like a bird that wanders from its nest is a man who wanders from his place, right? So what we're really talking about here is a man who wanders from his place, a man who does not, this is about adultery, really. And so it's saying if you're satisfied with the wrong things, back in verse 7, you're missing out on your own relationship with your wife. And if you're hungry because you have no relationship, you're going to grab any old stupid thing, right? Any bitter thing is sweet. And so the two together is really telling that story. And don't miss the spiritual side of this, right? I mean, God is saying, don't be hungry for idols. Don't be satisfied with idols, but rather be satisfied with God, right? Be satisfied with who He is. Don't be wandering. Be satisfied with God. Be satisfied with your relationship with Him. All right, verse 9. Ointment and perfume delight the heart, and the sweetness of a man's friend gives delight by hearty counsel. I mean, this is just really just talking about the beauty of a good friend, right? I like that it says, the sweetness of a man's friend gives delight by hearty counsel. I don't know exactly what that means. I tried to get some detail on it, but some of them said gives counsel of the soul, or gives deep counsel, gives passionate counsel, right? So again, a good friend gives good counsel. A good friend gives rebuke. A good friend doesn't shut up, and it's in fact an ointment and a perfume to hear those things when someone really provides good counsel and good help in time of need. Which goes to verse 10, do not forsake your own friend or your father's friend, nor go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor nearby than a brother far away, right? Do not forsake your own friend, your father's friend. There's something there about generational friendship, which is interesting. In this day and time, when we've all moved away from our parents, right? In the old days, everybody stayed in the same town, and your father's friend was very important, and your father's father's friend was very important. And we're missing out on that, which is unfortunate these days. But do not forsake your friend. Do not forsake your father's friend. Nor go to your brother's house in the day of calamity. And all they're saying, again, is that your brother may be far off, but you have a friend that's nearby. And that friend is that sweet friend, that friend that gives hearty counsel that we see in verse 9. And in the day of calamity, when the tough days come, that's a real friend. The friend that you can go to, the friend that will respond during calamity. Verse 11. My son, be wise and make my heart glad, that I may answer him who reproaches me. It's interesting here that what he's saying here is, my son, be wise and make my heart glad, right? That I may answer him who reproaches me. He's saying, if I'm attacked about my character, I can point to you and say, look what I've done in raising this son, right? It's interesting to me is God says the same thing about us, right? God says in Matthew 5:16, if you need it, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven, right? Let your light, so that God may be glorified. So this proverb is saying the same things. He's saying to his son, you do right, you do well. That will make my heart glad, and then people will glorify me because of who you are. But it's the same situation with God, that we are supposed to let our light shine. We're supposed to, be the kind of people that God wants us to be, such that he gets glorified. It's just amazing that I've never thought about the connection between the two things. Verse 12, a prudent man foresees evil and hides himself. The simple pass on and are punished. Actually, we saw this exact verse back in chapter 22. And let me just remind you of the things that we pulled out of that. I mean, the first thing, the prudent man foresees evil. The wise man sees evil. The wise man understands that there is evil and he sees it. And he doesn't just pass by. He gets it. That's evil. And I know that that's evil. I recognize it. So this is, again, as I said then, Satan hates to be seen. He's the deceiver, right? He likes to be in the background, not seen, just messing you up. If you can actually see him and recognize him and laugh at him, that's what he hates. So the prudent man sees evil. And then it says he hides himself. Now, this is a quiz now. Where does he hide himself? I didn't hear you answer.
God, in the Word.
Yeah, if you remember, it was in the strong tower of Proverbs 18:10, right? He hides himself in the strong tower in God's word. Exactly. When he sees evil, that's where he goes. He goes to the word. He goes to God. And then the opposite of that, right? The simple, they just keep walking by. They don't see it, and they're going to be punished for it. And by the way, they go by and they say, "I'm good." This is what got us in trouble, right? Everything's fine, no problem, right? They're not recognizing evil. They're not seeing evil, and that's the point of that, really. All right, verse 13. Take the garment of him who is surety for a stranger, and hold it in pledge when he is surety for a seductress. So I actually want to take this back to something we talked about last week. I don't know if I can just find it right off the top of my head. But we talked about sin and the 7 abominations associated with sin, right? That below the easy sin is a little bit harder sin, which is a little bit harder sin, which then you're in deep, deep doo-doo, right? There's always 7 levels of abomination behind what appears to be a easy temptation. And I think that what's interesting here, it says, take the garment of him who is surety for a stranger. So you remember all through Proverbs, they talk about surety, and they just say it's just a warning that you can get in deep trouble. And this is part of the reason that you get in deep trouble, because you take surety from a stranger, maybe somebody you don't know that well, but you're taking on his debt. And then you find out that he actually is surety for a seductress, right? That he is surety for someone else that is going to get him in deep trouble. So this is the dilemma with surety, taking on someone else's debts. You don't know the 7 levels of abomination behind that. You don't know what that person has gotten themselves into. So be careful with this whole idea of taking on somebody else's debts. Verse 14. He who blesses his friend with a loud voice, rising early in the morning, it will be counted a curse to him. So what this is saying is if you're blessing a friend with a loud voice, raising early in the morning, in other words, you're doing it for the show, right? You're doing it to show everyone how wonderful I think Hugh is. I think he's the best of all people. He's the most greatest person around. Isn't he amazing, right? I mean, when someone does that, you just know that there's all kinds of hypocrisy behind that, right? Not because of Hugh, but because of the way that it's made, the way this statement is made, right? This boasting, this loudness, this doing it at the wrong time, this awkwardness in actually making that kind of statement. And I think that's really all it's trying to say. And what's interesting is, the end of it says, and it will be counted as a curse to him, right? It's going to be looked at by God as a curse, and he's going to be responsible for what he actually has said. So be careful in the way that you talk about others, that you don't get into this foolish situation of a blessing with a loud voice. If you just, again, often it's done just to show off, or just to get someone else to look at you in a different way, because You've said what a wonderful thing they are, so hopefully they're going to turn around and say what a wonderful thing you are, right? So again, be careful with that. Verse 15 and 16. Here we go again. A continual dripping on a very rainy day and a contentious woman are alike. Whoever restrains her restrains the wind and grasps oil with his right hand.
You got this one.
I just skipped that.
I've already gotten a look from Joanne. I didn't even say anything. All right, but here's the problem. The problem is we've heard this verse 4 or so times already in Proverbs. And so I didn't feel like I could just skip over it as quickly as I have every other time and try to keep myself out of trouble. So I actually went and did a little study to try to find out a little bit more about what this means about the contentious woman. And what I found was an interesting quiz. It's kind of like, you're a redneck if, right? So this is you're a contentious woman if. So let me I'll just read these. And by the way, if anybody wants the website where all this is, I can be glad to share it. But here you go. Number 1, do you feel that it's your duty to remind your husband that it is time to A, mow the lawn, B, take out the trash, C, wash the car, D, ... right? Do you feel like it's your duty to remind them? By the way, we were watching, Joe's shaking her head, yes. We were watching a movie the other night, last night maybe, and the husband was going out to the store and the wife said, "Hey, don't forget the ham." And he said, "You have already reminded me 1,000 times about the ham." To which she responded, "Yeah, and the last time I reminded you 1,000 times, you still forgot the ham," right? Number 2. Number 2. Are you convinced that if you tell your husband often enough that it is important for him to do this or do that, that he will do exactly that or that, right? If you just tell him often enough. Number 3. Does the thought of asking your husband to complete a task just one time and then waiting until it gets done give you a feeling of anxiousness or frustration? Number 3 or 4, I don't know what number I'm on. Do you frequently correct your husband in front of others or challenge him in front of others, especially when you don't agree with him? That's really super bad. Next one. Can you easily list the 3 bad points about your husband's personality right now? Next. In the last 24 hours, have you begun a conversation with your husband by saying one of the following? You don't ever. If you would just. I already told you. Or I told you. Okay, that's enough. Yeah, so that's that's part 15. Then look at 16, right? Whoever restrains her restrains the wind and grasps oil in his right hand. So the dilemma here is, okay, what do you do about it if you have a contentious wife? How do you stop a contentious wife from being a contentious wife? It's like oil in a hand. Anybody want to try to answer that?
You do what you're supposed to do. Don't forget what you're supposed to do.
Don't forget the hand.
Why is he contentious? Because you're not doing what you should do.
You drowned her with it.
Yeah.
I wish we could see Joe's face right now.
She doesn't want it seen. Well, I mean, honestly, the only way is to pray and ask God to change. And the other thing is, obviously there's a responsibility of the man in that, right? I mean, to not forget the ham, right, 1,000 times. So both are true. There's a responsibility on the man to not make the woman contentious, and there's a responsibility on the woman not to be a continual dripping on a very rainy day, right? To bear some responsibility. But the tricky part here is only God can actually change that. And, have you actually prayed about it? Have you actually asked God, hey, we want this relationship to be different. We want it to be better. We don't want to have that kind of angst in our relationship.
Arguing this afternoon.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
He's just a messenger, Curtis.
I said, you're gonna have everybody here arguing over something this afternoon.
Well, let's keep going because there's a verse 18 also. I'm sorry, verse 17. As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. So as iron sharpens iron, excuse me. As, you know, the picture here in those days, right, is a hammer of the blacksmith that's used to pound the face of metal into a sword or an axe, right? And so it's saying here, it takes a man to sharpen the face of a man, to change his habits, to change his actions. So, so if you want to change the actions of a man, it's not going to be by the continual dripping on a rainy day, right? It actually takes a hammer, and the hammer is you know, it's suggested here, you know, as iron sharpens iron, another man. But I want to give you another picture too. Go to Isaiah chapter 50. Isaiah chapter 50, verse 4. Isaiah 54 says, "The Lord has given me the tongue of the learned, that I should know how to speak, a word in season to him who is weary." Now just pause right there. The Lord has given me a tongue of the learned, that I should know how to speak. So the Lord has given me the ability to speak, has given me the ability to say the right things, a word in season to him who is weary. Then look what it says. He awakens me morning by morning. He awakens my ear to hear as the learned. The Lord God has opened my ear, and I was not rebellious, nor did I turn away. I gave my back to those who struck me, and my cheeks to those who plucked out my beard. I did not hide my face from shame and spitting. So verse 4 says, the Lord has given me a tongue, has given me the ability to speak, but that came through awakening in the morning, listening to him, being willing to get struck on the back. In other words, to hear rebuke, right? To pluck out the beard, painful rebuke, and not hiding your face from being ashamed when you realize that you have made a mistake. That's the only way, if you want to get a tongue that's learned, if you want to have the right kind of voice. In other words, if you want that iron to be adjusted, this is the way that it happens. God does something. God does something, and sometimes it's very painful in order to get that iron sharpened. So in both cases, the contentious woman and the dull axe, it requires God to step in and do something. And so, it does tell us that if we want our marriage to be better, there's some work that God needs to do, right? And we need to be spending more time with him in order to make that better. All right. Hopefully we're not going to have another contentious woman verse in Proverbs. I haven't looked ahead. All right, verse next, wherever we are, verse 18. Whoever keeps the fig tree will eat its fruit, and so he who waits on his master will be honored. Now, this is actually connected to the previous verses, right? But first of all, whoever keeps the fig tree will eat its fruit, so he who waits on his master will be honored. So certainly there's like not getting ahead of your boss, not getting ahead of someone who's charged, right? Waiting on the master, then you get the figs. But of course, the same is true of God, waiting on the master, right? Waiting on him who you have asked to do something. And the question is, how long do you wait, right? How long do you wait on God to do something that you've asked him to do? And what's the answer?
As long as it takes.
As long as it takes, right? 70 times 7. We give up so quickly. I prayed once. Okay. Verse 19. As in water face reflects face, so a man's heart reveals him. We talked about this before, but I just, it's important to say it again, right? Your heart is who you really are, not the facade that you display to others. You know who you really are, and your heart is who you really are. I said before, we often think of ourselves, I'm a body that has a heart, that has a soul, but in fact, it's the other way around. You are a heart, you are a soul that has a body. That's who you really are, is it what's in your heart. And the Bible says over and over again to guard your heart, submit your heart to God, right? Get your heart straight. Verse 20. Hell and destruction are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. Turn to 1 John chapter 2. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. First John 2:15. Mine says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever. So, ladies, when we do Proverbs 31 and I take the boys outside, this is what we're going to be studying. Okay, so we're going to have a strong conversation about these verses while y'all talk about Proverbs 31. Just wanted to let you know. The eyes of the man are never satisfied, and it's what gets us in trouble over and over and over. I don't know, where are we? Verse 21. The refining pot is for silver and the furnace for gold. A man is valued by what others say of him, right? And what's interesting here is, a man is valued not by what he says, again, it's by what others say of you. And as I said earlier, what God says about you. It's not only what they say, but who says it, right? I also want you to remind yourselves, go to Luke chapter 6, if you don't mind. Go to Luke chapter 6. This is an important verse. Luke chapter 6, verse 26. I'm in John, and I'm wondering why in the world that does not look right. Luke 6:26. There you go. Luke 6:26, it says, woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets, right? A man is valued by what others say of him, but at the same time, if all men speak well of you, then you could be in trouble. Everybody thinks you're wonderful. Everybody thinks you're incredible. Everybody thinks continues to praise you. That's exactly what they did to the false prophets. Maybe you're not telling the truth. Maybe you're not being honest. Because when you do tell the truth and you are honest and you do bring rebuke, everyone's not going to speak well of you. There's going to be some people who are upset with you because you are speaking the truth, because you're being honest. Woe to you when all men speak well of you. And a man is valued by what others say of him. There's a balance in between those things, right? Verse 22. Though you grind a fool into mortar with a pestle along with crushed grain, yet his foolishness will not depart from him. That's interesting, right? This picture, it takes, you take the wheat, you put it in the mortar and pestle, you grind it such that you can get the good wheat out, right? And the husk and all the trash can blow away. The problem is, he's saying that doesn't work for a fool. The fool is, just continuing to beat him up doesn't actually get him there, because he is stuck, right? He is stuck in his ways. He's stuck in his foolishness. And one of the commentaries used this statement and said, we're not talking here about natural fools, but willful fools. In other words, it's not about, when we talk about fools, and I think I've said this before, it's not about someone who's just stupid, right, or dumb. We're talking about someone who's a willful fool, someone who has rejected Christ, someone who has decided, right, that they're not going to follow these proverbs. That's the one that grinding them down, beating them up is not actually going to get them there because they have decided to be in that place. Verse 23. We are getting done really quickly. All right, verse 23. Be diligent to know the state of your flocks and attend to your herds. Be sure you know the condition or actively find out. Pay attention with intense and intimate knowledge to your flock. Now, turn to 1 Peter chapter 5. Because the question becomes, okay, who's my flock? 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 1. It says, the elders who are among you I exhort, I who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory to be revealed. So he's about to say something to the elders. By the way, I want you to look around the room and see the elders. You see them? You is the elders, right? I've tried to convince you this many times over, but you is it. You am it. You are the elders. So when Peter here is speaking to the elders, he's speaking to you. Verse 2. Shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you'll receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. Well, that last verse, it ought to give you chills, right? When the chief shepherd appears, you'll receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. But verse 2, shepherd the flock of God which is among you. You have all been given a flock. You have all, not only your families, well, that's obviously part of your flock, but the people that you influence, the people that you rub shoulders with, the people that look up to you, the people that go, well, if Rick thinks it's okay, then it's okay, right? The people that look at you and expect you to be an example. Be diligent to know the state of your flock. So how are those people that are looking up at you? Are you attending to them? Are you paying attention to them? Do you really know what's going on in their lives? Have you inquired? And you all know that there's so many more people looking up to you than you even realize, right? Pay attention. Pay attention to what you're doing, but also pay attention to them. Get into their lives and find out what's going on and how you can help. Verse 24, for riches are not forever, nor does a crown endure to all generations. I think what this is saying is, if you drop the ball's going to be dropped, right? The crown doesn't automatically go from generation to generation. It only goes if you are diligent to know the state of your flock and you're attending to your herd. If you want to have an influence on those people that are looking up to you, you've got to be diligent. You got to attend. The crown doesn't just go just because you're a nice person. Doesn't mean that everyone who looks up to you is going to be a nice person if you aren't actually actively doing something about it, aren't actually actively being diligent to oversee that herd, that flock. It's an active thing. The crown will not. No. Let me just say this about myself, right? I mean, my grandmother was solid, had a solid relationship with God. My mom did not, and dropped the ball, if you will, right? And so I had to pick the ball up off the ground in the dirt in order to understand who God was. Now, I'm thankful to God for doing that, but it would have been a lot easier if the ball had just been passed. If I had known what was real and what was true as I was growing up. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it just made me think back to verse 10, when it talks about don't abandon your father's friend, the generational thing. I mean, it goes, just goes, you die and your thoughts go with you. Those thoughts, if they were correct and helpful to others, I mean, we talk about people in the past that meant something to us and what they did, just like you said. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very important. And just us recognizing that we're in the chain, right? And we're a critical part of that chain in order to pass on who God is. And again, a lot of times, like here, I'm speaking about my grandmother, right? I mean, she's not hearing that. She's not getting praise right now for what she did then, right? And you may not get praise now. You may get praise later for what you're doing for your children, for your grandchildren, for the friends that are around you, right? But you got to be that chain. You got to be the part in it. You got to do your part. You got to be diligent. You got to tend to the herd. All right. Verse 25. Let me just read 25 through 27 to get it all together. It says, when the hay is removed and the tender grass shows itself, and the herbs of the mountains are gathered in, the lambs will provide your clothing, and the goats the price of a field. You shall have enough goat's milk for your food, for the food of your household, and the nourishment of your maidservants. So this is a picture, obviously, the grass is removed. What it's really saying there, if you're doing your job in harvesting the grass, then tender shoots show itself. If you do your jobs in getting the herbs of the mountain, and those are gathered in, then the lambs will have something to eat, and they will provide your clothing. And the goats, you will have goats that you can sell in order to buy a field. You will have enough milk from the goats, it actually 26 says he goats and 27 says she goats. You have the she goats that provide milk for you, for your household, for your whole flock, right? New grass will appear, young rams will have food, et cetera, et cetera. I think what it's really saying is it's all there for you and your flock. Everything that's needed for you and your flock, for you and those that you influence is provided for you, but it takes diligence. You got to remove the hay. You got to collect the herbs. You got to take care of the lambs and the goats, right? It takes diligence, consistency, stick-to-itiveness when you don't feel like it, when temptation rails against you. But everything that you need for you and your flock is there, is available, if you do your part. I think that's the connection back to 23 and 24. Okay, that's chapter 27. I would go to chapter 28, but I'm not ready. So we're just going to stop there. Let's see. Do I have a summary? Of course I do. The first one is be careful on whose commendation you reside. Be careful on whose commendation of you live in, you take hold of, right? Is it the commendation of a fool? Is it the commendation of someone who doesn't like you? Is it the commendation of a friend? Is it the rebuke of a friend? Is it the commendation of God? I think we get settled into, I think I know I'm okay because of this input I've gotten. Be careful of where you're getting your input as to whether you're okay or not. Yeah, that's it. Okay. And connected to that, right? Real love is honest and honest to a fault. And it's available during those crushing times. I could just, as just a testimony, this group is so amazing. When we've had needed help, and you guys have stepped up in so many different ways. And that to me is what real love is about, is stepping up during the crushing, during the tough times, and being honest when you see mistakes being made. I keep it up. This whole issue of contentiousness, I would just say, examine yourself, right? Men, women, examine yourself in this whole issue of contentiousness. Next, connected to that, right? Only God can change a man or a woman. And then finally, this last piece, right? Know the condition of your flock and do something about it. Know the condition of your flock intimately and do something about it. Okay. What else? Any other thoughts? Well, Tim asked me to stop early because he wanted to take about 10 minutes to explain the map on the board.
I think the map is self-sufficient. Now, you can park anywhere in the circle, anywhere down to the barn. Just those, up at the top, those 4 spots, and maybe 5 if you have a small car on the 5th one over there. Just park make sure your wheels are all the way to the edge. Otherwise, you'll block the circle. People try to go down.
If you go too far, Tim will tow you out, right?
Can you park in the middle?
Big Tim will with that big truck it is.
What about the middle of the circle?
No, that's where you'll see you can't, because that's where baby Jesus is right now.
All right, let's move into prayer request time.
Can you stop the recording?
Yes.
Let's see if I can stop the recording now. Let's see. Yes, I can. Good. Okay, so that worked all right.